to whether they were responsible to keep it up and show it, or whether they should have came to public pressure, which they did.
Yeah. So what did you think of it then? Since you,
I thought they shouldn't have pulled it. Like, if they chose, they obviously saw it, they chose to put it up for a reason. Like, you should stick with it, basically.
yeah, and it had a tremendous amount of controversy because of that very thing. Like, they had chosen it, they knew what the content of the work was when they selected it for the exhibition. It's not as if they'd never heard of this. It's part of a much longer piece. It's actually like a 30, 35-minute video. But this edit of it with that music soundtrack on top was the one that garnered so much controversy. So what kind of imagery did you see in this video? Besides the ants crawling on the crucifix, of course, but what other images might have stood out?
Why was he masturbating?
Why was he? Okay. Yeah, there's disturbing imagery, there's sexual imagery. Why was he masturbating? Why was he, and the edit, it cuts right there, and actually, it's more about what's unseen sometimes than seen. So yeah, it's disturbing, it's angry. This is not a pleasant trip through the daisies kind of piece. There's this very iconic image, the photo here, of Meirowitz sewing his lips shut, and he's doing that in the video. I don't know if you caught that. He's doing it to two pieces of, there's 2 pieces of wood that he's also sewing with this red thread, and then again you see showing his lips shut, sewing his lips shut, talking about the kind of, there's a lot going on. I mean, this is kind of the silence that he himself is forced to endure, but then also there's pain, there's physical torture going on in that as well. So he's talking about his own personal experience in this video. He was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS in 1987, and he would die in 1992. Also in 1987, his best friend and his longtime partner, his former lover, died of AIDS after he got tested and learned that he himself had it. So this video was born out of that, born out of the anger and the frustration he was feeling as somebody who is part of this marginalized population that is, it was almost at the time, I mean, again, I wasn't in that community at that time, but it's described by many artists as kind of almost like a war in which your friends are dying left and right, and no one understands why. There's a culture of fear surrounding the transmission of the disease, exactly how it's transmitted, how do you get it, and then this stigma of especially the gay male population in major urban centers in North America and in Europe as well, that these people are suddenly carriers of this mysterious plague. They should be avoided at all times. So it's not a pleasant sensation to sit through this film. And I have this quote here from a review of the piece, and it talks about how the contradiction, speed, and phantasmagoria of a time when it was reasonable to assume that all the political and social progress gay people had achieved in the 60s and 70s was being revoked. So against the surreal Reagan-era backdrop of mourning in America and a feel-good surge of nostalgia and triumphalism. So that quote is picking up on this, this current of over-optimism in the 1980s. We talked about neoliberalism in previous weeks, Reagan-Thatcher-era economic policies that created prosperity for many people, at the expense of others. And it's these marginalized populations that are actually falling victim to that, and it's creating a divide, cultural divide in especially major urban areas. So just to give you a few sort of just a little bit more about the video, the ants, the really famous scene with the ants crawling on the crucifix. Actually, so he spoke about ants and their symbolism to him. He considered them a stand-in for humanity, and it was part of a lifelong fascination with the natural world. And so it wasn't simply an themselves have a not altogether negative meaning in relation to the video. And so that's the scene that angered people so much. And it's interesting that that's also the scene that he found, and people who read this, read stuff into this video find that it has the most ambiguity. So again, it shows that sometimes what creates controversy is something that's not as black and white as it seems. So obviously, that's not always obviously that's not always the case. So there's, and when I talk about this anti-Catholic, anti-religious bias against homosexuals, against AIDS patients, that does rear its ugly head. I'm not saying in any way that all religion is like this, but I'm just saying these are well-documented statements that certain extremists and people demonstrating against gay rights, gay marriage, against AIDS research, AIDS funding, and education. These are the type of statements that have been publicly made. So we have AIDS is God's curse, and then this lovely got AIDS yet, G-A-Y, gay, and then on these demonstrators' clothing. So it shows what AIDS activist artists were up against. And when we talk about activist art and talking about it having specific goals, I want to reiterate, not all art that we've seen has had, the goal of enacting a specific change, but they've usually had some kind of social progress or some kind of, either antagonism or a desire to change something at its core. With AIDS activist art, you see several different goals. So combating the culture of fear surrounding AIDS, doing this through information, expressing HIV positive status. So if an artist, him or herself, is HIV positive, it actually makes a huge statement for them to proclaim that, or a celebrity as well. I know when Magic Johnson did it, it was a huge deal. So expressing HIV positive status, showing the diversity of people affected. So it's not just one segment of the population. It's actually capable of affecting everyone. And then also dealing with homophobia and the stigma surrounding the main groups affected by AIDS in the West. Again, AIDS in Africa is a whole other story, and we'll touch on that. But in the West, in the 1980s and 90s, it's definitely a refighting of, or not a re, it is the fighting of the culture wars, and against what is perceived to be delinquent or deviant behaviors. So then also agitating for AIDS research and safe-sex education. This is the very practical role of AIDS activist art, and also educating the population about the transmission and spread. And then finally, bringing out the connection between AIDS and poverty in Africa. And that's, again, a later goal, because as soon as progress started to be made in the West, then you see a desire to shift the focus to Africa. And just according to the official numbers, there's almost 23 million people in sub-Saharan Africa living with AIDS right now. So it is a massive problem. So, a brief history, because I'm sure a lot of you were not even alive when the AIDS epidemic really became part of national news. So I'm sure you have some inkling of why it's important or what it was like. But it actually, the AIDS crisis started with a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear. And again, it was the job of the activist artists to overcome that fear. And these are just two examples of AIDS posters. And this one here on the left, I love it because it shows, it's explaining that you can touch someone with AIDS or HIV. It is not going to give you the disease. And that was actually a huge fear. Back in the 80s, people were afraid of using a toilet seat that someone with AIDS may have sat on, or there was this pervasive myth that you could sit down in a movie theater and there would be a syringe filled with AIDS-infected blood, and it would stab you, and you get AIDS from just going to the movies. Because people were not educated on the actual spread and kind of the means of which the virus could live either outside the human body or within the human body, and how person-to-person contact actually functioned. So, but there was a time when that actually was the norm, that you actually had to avoid this.
If there was a syringe full of HIV blood, you could get infected, right, or something?
Not theoretically, no. No, actually. So HIV, I mean, I remember studying this a long, long time ago in like biology class, but HIV cannot sustain itself outside the human body for any like reasonable period of time. So I guess the only way, I mean, if it has to be kept at the right temperature. So it can be in the blood supply. That's why hemophiliacs were so often infected with HIV, and especially in the beginning. But that's blood that's processed and stored in very particular ways. Just taking a syringe and and leaving it in a seat for a while. There's similar reasons why mosquitoes don't transmit AIDS. Again, I don't know the exact science behind that, but it's a similar reason. So it was debunked as a myth. I think you can go to like Snopes.com and see for yourself, but it's actually not the case. Don't worry, you can freely go to the movies. So AIDS stands for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. The virus that causes AIDS is HIV, human immune deficiency virus. AIDS was originally called several different things. The kind of most pervasive name was actually GRID back in the 80s. It was called gay-related immune disorder. So it's associated with a very particular population, and the stigma of that name stuck. So it almost became shameful to declare that you had AIDS or HIV if you were not a member of that population.
Can you repeat what that stands for again?
Gay-related immune disorder, GRID. So there are documented cases of the disease pre-1970. The pandemic actually started in the late 1970s, and by 1980 it was already on 5 continents. And it was not on Asia at that point, but then it spread there quite quickly. In March 1981 is where you first start seeing this aggressive form of benign cancer called sarcoma, which is KS for short. And this is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Philadelphia with Tom Hanks. It's very old, I know, it's ancient, but he has these lesions on his face, and he's covering them up. And these lesions are this sarcoma, and they became just a very obvious outward sign that you were infected or afflicted. So Gaeta in New York started exhibiting this aggressive form of cancer, which is benign and normally wouldn't affect someone in this population. So it was a clue that there was something going wrong. At the same time, there was an increase in this really strange form of pneumonia, which was called PCP, but no relation to the drug. So this PCP form of pneumonia combined with the sarcoma really clued in people, scientists, researchers, and just healthcare workers who were dealing with these populations, that there was some disease going on. But at the time, they didn't know it was caused by a virus. They didn't know really about the causality of this new disease. It was labeled GRID in 1982, and by then there were 452 cases in 23 states in the U.S. There were also cases in other parts of North America, but I only have the statistic for that. Then it began being reported in Haitians and hemophiliacs. And hemophiliacs, of course, because of the blood supply. And by September 1982, it had been seen in so many parts of the population outside the gay male population of urban centers that they had to finally drop the label GRID. And AIDS, as we know it, was named. So AIDS was linked to transfusions later that year. And finally, it was linked to heterosexual intercourse in 1983. So by then, it was pretty clear that how you get it. But again, there were still a lot of myths about really how this transmitted and like the different. There was a fear that kids would transmit AIDS, for example. So by the end of 1983, there were now 3,000 AIDS cases in the U.S. So up from only 452 cases like half a year before. So it was spreading at an incredible rate. And then by April of 1984, the virus that caused AIDS was finally isolated, and a test was developed. And this allowed for a lot more information to be processed about the disease. So that was when you start seeing activism focused on on education and information, because at this point it's no longer this mysterious killer, but it's something that can be isolated, it can be understood, and ultimately it can be cured. The goal is. But 1984 also is when the epidemic of fear starts to happen. research that can be done, it's when you start to see the backlash against the communities who are most at risk for this disease. So we'll start with some of the major works of AIDS activism. And again, Richard Meyer in the article that you read for today, he talks quite a bit about the graphic sensibility of brand theory and ACT UP. So I hope you all recognize this image. It's a very famous poster. It's a very famous logo. Again, it's not as pervasive on the streets today. Again, the kind of wave of AIDS activism that ushered this in has ended and shifted into other focuses, but it's still a very, very iconic image. So what does this stand for? What is going on here? So you can't really tell, but there is a black background. I think it's actually a poster. So let's talk about a little bit why this is effective and why and what this image conveys. So first of all, what's the pink triangle? Yes.
I could be entirely wrong, but I don't know if it's like during the Holocaust, like how they marked homosexual individuals is with a pink triangle.
Absolutely. That is exactly what they did in the Holocaust. They marked, so when you were brought in and kind of booked in the concentration camp, you were categorized with a symbol. And if you're a political prisoner, you got certain symbol. If you were homosexual, you got the pink triangle. You could also be many things. You could be a political prisoner, Jewish, and a homosexual. And you could have all kinds of symbols. And they really didn't like you then. But again, this is a uniform from one of the prisoners. So Grand Fury appropriates this pink triangle. So it's very striking. It's simple. It's something that maybe not everyone has on their mind, but the association between Nazism, the concentration camps, genocide, and persecution of gay individuals is really clear. And then the text, silence equals death. There's probably no way to misread that. This is a very clear image. It's speaking to the population, saying if you're in fear of speaking out, if you're in fear of disclosing your status or seeking treatment because you don't know what's going to happen, not only will you die, but other people around you will die. This is creating an epidemic because of the fear, because of silence. So it's poetic in that sense, and it's also, again, incredibly direct. And so the pink triangle takes on a new meaning, not just the violence of the Holocaust, but now the tragedy that AIDS has brought upon the population. At the same time, it's also speaking to a very particular population. So again, because of the pink triangle, this is encoded so that, again, homosexuals will be able to understand, will equate this to what their situation is. This is not really for, at the time, again, it's not really for the Haitians or the hemophilia, the other populations that are experiencing the disease in rapid numbers. So again, are rapidly increasing numbers. So again, it is very directed for a specific population. It's using the language of advertising, graphic design. It's very, and Richard Meyer talks about how it seduces the audience into dealing with difficult issues by simulating the glossy look of advertising. And advertising culture in the 80s was, it was really had a very particular sensibility. It was everywhere. This is where it's beyond the Mad Men era. You actually start seeing advertising. It's where you get the total immersion and inundation ads that, of course, you see today even more. So again, simulating that look. People pay attention to advertisements, especially in the 80s. People pay attention. So rather than making it sort of some obscure art piece, mimicking the graphic quality of advertising is actually going to get more attention and get the message across. So it's a practical form of art, a practical form of activism. So ACT UP, then. We'll talk about Grand Fury, the collective, and again, we'll be talking about it more in tutorial, but ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, ACT-UP. It was incorporated in 1987, and so if Grand Fury created this image, ACT UP distributed it. They marketed this image. They placed it on everything, stickers, bags, not just the posters, but T-shirts, all over the place. And ACT UP also incorporated it into their installation marks. So it's an interesting case of one collective creating an image, the other collective disseminating it, popularizing it, and they're working together to really get this message out. So this sort of neon light up silence equals death is from a larger installation called Let the Record Show. So it was a street front installation at the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York. And this is how it looked like from a distance. And that's kind of the final, there's not that many great images of it that I can find. But what do you see going on? So this is a street front image. You don't have to enter the museum to see it. Anyone walking by, is going to be bathed in this light, is going to be drawn to this window because it's, as you saw in the earlier image, it's really attention-getting on the side of the street. So what do you see going on here? You might not be able to identify actual people, but can you kind of tell what's going on? What are the people in yellow back there? What do they look like? Soldiers, yeah, there's soldiers in the back. It's a famous image. Maybe not as famous too, but I think probably would have been a little more famous back then. This is an image of the Nuremberg trials in Germany after the Holocaust. This is when they put the Nazi leadership, those that hadn't fled or killed themselves, they put the Nazi leadership on trial. And it resulted in the execution of many, many, many high-ups in the Nazi party and perpetrators of the genocide. So that image is the Nuremberg trials. The people in the front are political leaders from the late 1980s. I believe Reagan's in there. Again, it's not that great of a fit. Reagan's all the way on the right. And these are all other assorted 1980s political figures who are from the right-wing conservative establishment that is in power at the time. And they are actively blocking AIDS research, AIDS education, and they're repeating this narrative, blaming the victims. So very literally, there's no subtlety whatsoever. They're literally equating the Republican conservative establishment in the United States with the Nazi leaders. And they're implying that they are going to get their comeuppance. Let the record show. So let the record show is a phrase that you hear in trial speak, and you watch Law and Order, or whatever show's on now, about legal dramas, and they're like, let the record show. So this is recorded in history. So let the record show that these, and then there's also quotations from each of these political figures underneath. Obviously you can't read any of them from here, but so these people's statements, what they've said about the AIDS epidemic is on record for all of history. And so this is taking a long view. It's saying that eventually these people will be judged. We will judge them. And because they're sitting in judgment on us now, they're blaming us, they're blaming the victims, we will in turn blame them. The wheel of history is going to turn. So it's a very direct statement. And again, combined with the silence equals death logo, it's branded. You can tell that this installation is from Grand Fury, it's from ACT UP. It is an artist's take on the situation, and it's also artists educating the public and warning the establishment that they're on the wrong side of this. Sometimes there is a right and sometimes there is a wrong. It's not always gray, and this is, that's what this this installation is trying to get across to the public. So you're going to see, again, you're going to see a lot more posters in the tutorial, but I'm just going to go through a few of them. So this is another Grand Fury. The government has blood on its one AIDS death every half hour, which is a very frightening number when you think about it. And this idea of blood, the bloody handprint, Richard Meyer talks about this, where there was not just these posters, but then there was a call and response between the posters and the public. So people took up the bloody handprint as a sign, a symbol of the government having blood on its hands, and they would dip their hands in red paint and put them over the city as well. So there were the posters, and then there were the bloody handprints, or the bloody handprints, because it wasn't actual blood. But again, the idea of blood, red paint, it brings up reminders of the transmission of the disease, the fact that it's in the blood supply. The idea that your city, you would wake up and your city would be covered in bloody handprints. Again, agitating, trying to kind of lull the population, the rest of the population, out of its willful obliviousness to the epidemic. There's also practical education. So another grand period, they have their signature at the bottom of the grand period. Men use condoms or beat it. There's lots of, the article talks about all the, the different kind of, the different versions of this that happened before. And there's actually, they kind of distilled it into this pithy, perfect little sentence, because it was actually a very complicated issue, because the issue of wearing condoms and the spread of disease is not limited to the gay male population. It's also, there's heterosexual sex that's also affected by it. So they're reaching a broader audience with this, and they're attempting also to educate not just men but women as well. That and unprotected sex is not safe. It could be a death sentence if you let it. Now they're trying to educate women specifically. Again, there's a whole evolution of the way they try to reach women, because Grand Fury was made up of gay men. So dealing with women's issues and bringing women into the discussion was something that didn't come completely naturally, but they did make quite an effort to include women in the poster conversation. So women don't get AIDS; they just die from it. And then let's see if I can that 65% of HIV-positive women get sick and die from chronic infections that don't fit the Centers for Disease Control's definition of AIDS. Without that recognition, women are denied access to what little health care exists. The CDC must expand the definition of AIDS. This is a very, very specific and gender-based poster. So it's talking about a very specific problem that is too narrowly defined. And people who might have AIDS or something on the AIDS spectrum, if that's a term, they are they're denied access because they don't fit the rubric. Their symptoms don't necessarily, their symptoms are gendered in a way. So it's, again, trying to reach out to other populations, broadening the definition, broadening the reach of their, of their influence. And this is, again, one of their most famous posters, Freeze My Lips. This is a theme that comes up again and again. This idea that kissing doesn't kill. We'll see that poster in a bit. That kissing, not just that kissing doesn't kill, but that we're going to take this image of homosexuality and we're going to put it out, right up front. This is going to be on the posters on the streets. And now, again, it seems a little quaint to us today because, again, there's a lot. This image isn't shocking to us today. But again, imagine what it would have been like in the 1980s had you been, walking the streets of New York or other major urban centers in North America, and to kind of be faced with same-sex affection, and kissing on the street, in fact. So it's also about defiance. The act of kissing becomes a political act, and the image of kissing, the image of affection as well, it so that people will be kind of lulled into the sense that they can look, it's not confrontational, and then they realize the subject matter. So that's, again, this use of advertising, of graphic sensibility in this art. So it's also, and again, as I said, it's educating the audience and kind of lulling them into that, into dealing with difficult issues. And again, so Meyer has a really good quote about this. This poster mimics the codes of capitalist pleasure and visual seduction to capture the viewer's attention and direct it to the AIDS crisis. It also affirms the power of clear desire in the face of an ongoing epidemic and challenges misinformation about AIDS. So it mimics the codes of capitalist pleasure and visual seduction. So it's, again, as I said, it's taking that language of advertising and using it, turning it upside down. And I like this idea also about affirming the power of desire. So there can be a horrible epidemic, there can be a mysterious disease that is affecting massive numbers of people, but people are still going to fall in love. People are still going to kiss. People are still going to have sex. This is not, this isn't going to stop. And this is kind of what conservative politicians are always saying, oh, people should just stop having sex, but that doesn't make any sense. And this kind of reaffirms that. And it also, it'll speak to a person that what you're doing isn't wrong. What you're thinking and what you desire isn't wrong. But again, kissing doesn't kill, greed and indifference do. And finally, I'll touch on this briefly. This is the Grand Fury Venice Biennial picture, or image. This is extremely controversial. So remember we talked about the Venice Biennale and how different groups are chosen to represent different countries. Well, Grand Fury was chosen to represent the United States in 1990. And this was what they came up with. The Catholic Church has long taught men and women to loathe their bodies and to fear their sexual natures. This particular vision of good and evil continues to bring suffering and even death. By holding medicine hostage to Catholic morality and withholding information, which allows people to protect themselves and each other from acquiring the human immunodeficiency virus, the Church seeks to punish all who do not share in its peculiar version of human experience and makes clear its preference for living saints and dead sinners. It is immoral to practice bad medicine. It is bad medicine to deny people information that can help end the AIDS crisis. Condoms and clean needles save lives as surely as the earth revolves around the sun. AIDS is caused by a virus, and a virus has no morals. And the quote that they have from, I believe that's John Cardinal O'Connor, is the quote they have. The truth is not in condoms or clean needles. These are lies. Good morality is good medicine. So this sort of screed here is a response to this. Good morality is good medicine. If we just behave properly, this disease will go away. It ignores the reality of this disease. It ignores the fact that massive numbers of heterosexual couples have also been infected. It ignores the whole crisis in the developing world. Yes.
That's a picture of.
That's a picture of the Pope. But yes, this is like Pope John Paul II. But then John Cardinal. Sorry, I was reading that down here.
So if you don't actually read into it, you assume the Pope said that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, it's really blurry, and there's no way you could have read that from like where you are. But it's the cardinal is speaking the church's stance, and the Pope because he's the figurehead of the church. Because to practicing Catholics, the Pope is infallible. His word is supposed to be God's word, and so what the church says, what the Pope endorses. So it all reads into it, and putting the Pope's image there is far more controversial, but also far more effective than putting the cardinal. So yes, good call on that. So again, it's a lot. I mean, it's much more not long-winded, but there's a lot more words going on here than in the posters, and that reflects the fact that this isn't a poster in the sense that the others were. This isn't meant to be put up. I mean, it was put up on the streets. There are reproductions of this made. but it's not meant to be digested so quickly. It's meant to be pondered. It's meant, you're supposed to actually, you're supposed to read this and think. And if you are on the opposite side, or if you are part of the values, people who believe that good morality is good medicine, then this is supposed to challenge them. Whether or not it actually does, I mean, there's no way to measure. But it's definitely moving away from the very polished graphic sensibility that the earlier posters did. So, moving on, I'm going to ask how many of you saw the general idea show at